All right, Nicole, are you ready to talk houses today?
Yes, we are talking all about houses, and no, we're not talking condos, apartments, things like that. We are talking astrology houses. One of my favorite things in astrology was learning about the houses. Once I understood the general gist of things, I was like, okay, give me more. I want to take it deeper.
I know, the houses are such a fun, just like additional way to explore the chart. They typically come like after the signs, and then you realize there's this whole thing called houses, and you're like, why are people talking about houses in astrology? Like, what does this mean? But it's a really fun way to like even go a level deeper into just understanding yourself through astrology. And so I think everything that we've been talking about up until this point really does kind of give us this nice gradual build into what we're talking about today, which is the housing system. And I know many of you have heard us talking about houses and, you know, the past episodes, and you've been like, I'm so excited to learn about the houses. So we're finally going to bring it to you guys today, and it's going to be good.
Yeah, for sure. I think houses are super important to start to grasp in astrology once you kind of get the basics. And houses are part of the basics, but once you're kind of, you know, you're understanding the 12 signs, you're starting to understand your own chart, like where's your sun, moon, and rising, you're understanding these bigger aspects. Houses are great because like you can have the same, let's just say, you know, sun and moon is someone else, but like your houses may be completely different. So where that shows up in your chart will be so different. That's why not every Scorpio is the same. That's why not every Aquarius is the same. I mean, no two people with the same sign are exactly alike. And it's because of the houses and all of the other aspects of the chart. So this will help us add even more flavor, more color, more excitement to your already growing astrology knowledge.
Up until this point, we've talked about the sun, the moon, the rising. In our first episode, we talked a little bit about Saturn. Actually, we talked a lot about Saturn in a whole episode, not just a little. We talked about Pluto as well. So we've talked about several of just these aspects of you. That's really how I like to think about the two luminaries, the sun and the moon. They're a core aspect of you, as well as all of the other planets in their chart. We all have these aspects of ourselves that are here to express themselves out in the world in a different way. And the way that we really deepen into how these parts of us are here to express ourselves, for example, you know, from the sun sign, when we talked all about that, our sign of the sun is how we came here to express ultimately our life's purpose, the core essence, 70% of who we came here to be in the world through our sun and the sign of the sun. But now when we bring in houses, we're really looking at where that aspect of ourself seeks to be expressed. So for example, if you think about the sun, we talked about the sun being the most important part of you, 70% of who you are, 70% of your makeup, and you're looking at the house of your sun, that tells you so much too about where you seek to express your life's purpose out in the world. So the housing system really is just as important as the sign, but it really tells you a little bit of like a different story about, how that part of you is here to show up in the world. So we've got the planet being the aspect of you. We've got the sign being how that aspect of you seeks expression. And then we have the house, which is where that aspect of you seeks to be expressed out in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation because when you think about this, like, think about all the knowledge you've already obtained about astrology. And I kind of liken it to making a meal or making a recipe, and knowing the houses is like adding more complex ingredients to your recipe. So like a peanut butter and jelly would totally feed you. Bread, peanut butter, jelly. It's a meal for some, right? And it creates a whole sandwich. It's done. But then you could really get gourmet with that. You could make that peanut butter and jelly really awesome. You could elevate your peanut butter and jelly sandwich to like a really gourmet sandwich. You could start adding different ingredients. And that's when we start adding in the houses. We add in aspects. We add in different pieces of astrology. You could have like a 7-course meal eventually, but take it slow. The peanut butter and jelly will still feed you the signs, the houses, the planets and what they mean. And then you can add on to that when you start to layer things on top. So instead of like a 15-layer club sandwich, we're starting easy with this. And so houses just add to that solid foundation, that solid meal that you already have with astrology.
A good old solid peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It literally is. It's like I mean, I don't know which one would be the planet, the sign of the
Yeah.
house, but you've got three components there, and like that really does make up. Together, separate, you could eat the bread, you could eat the peanut butter, you could eat the jelly, you could eat them separate, and they are their own thing. But together, what they create, which I don't even like peanut butter and jelly, but if you do, then it creates this really juicy thing that you get to eat that you enjoy eating. So they all really do come together to help you understand a part of you that you are out in the world expressing. Now, in our next episode, we're actually going to dive into all of the planetary bodies. And in that episode, you can then take that and like understand, okay, well, what's my Venus aspect of myself? Like, how does my Venus show up? How does my Mars show up? How does my, Uranus and all of the planets? We're going to be going through all of those. And then you can take that and also pair it back with this episode too. So for today, for purposes of this episode, really just think about what we've already gone through up until this point, being the sun, the moon, Saturn specifically. Like those three are really important. And just for example, thinking about Saturn, we talked about how Saturn is your life lesson, some of the challenges, some of the growth that you came here to experience. Now, we talked about the signs specifically of your Saturn in the Saturn episode, and maybe like how you came here to grow, how you came here to experience lessons in this life, or the kind of lessons you came here to experience. Well, the house is going to even add another layer to that, saying like, maybe where are you going to experience some challenges? When we're thinking about houses, if you're actually looking at your chart, your natal wheel, there are like 12 pieces of the pie. And the first house is starting with where your rising sign actually is. So your rising sign determines your first house. And then from there, you've got 12 pieces of the pie that follow from house 1 all the way to house 12. And that's going to help you understand, where your planets are falling and in what houses. And that's how you're able to see, okay, I've got planets in the second house. Maybe I've got planets in the first house right there next to my ascendant, which is really powerful. Ascendant is also rising sign. We talked about that in episode 1. But, if you've got planets right there, with your rising sign, like Nicole does, that's something that's really important for you to take note of about yourself and really understand about yourself, is like who you are on the surface is also really connected to these really important aspects of you. I have no planets in my first house. So really it's just this like Virgo sign of mine that's my rising sign, but all my planets are busy doing other things in other houses. And so that's just kind of like really brief, kind of, highlighting big picture. If you're looking at your chart, kind of how you can understand there's 12 houses that represent different areas of your life where parts of you are going to seek expression.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to note that like what we talked about in the zodiac episode, so we went in order from Aries all the way through Pisces. It's like that is how the traditional order of these houses works. And so when we talk about them, the first house is going to be traditionally associated with Aries. Now, you may not have Aries in the first house, and that is okay, but it's how these themes kind of work together, and they really make up the whole wheel. And so, example, Virgo is associated with the sixth house. So if you don't have Virgo planets in your chart, but you have a packed sixth house, you're going to get that Virgo influence in that house. And so it's just kind of important to call that out, because while we're layering things here, as we're starting to build this like bigger picture of your astrology blueprint, you start to see like, oh, okay, different pieces come in at different times and add different attributes and archetypes into what makes you you. And like Keelie said, where are you actually seeking expression in those areas? And so I always love to look at that, because I have very packed houses. Like I have 3 that are just full of planets and the rest are kind of empty. And so I'm like, I know that those 3 houses and then their associated signs are very popular themes in my life, and I should really get to know them. And so when you look at your chart, pay attention and look at like, where do I have things in houses? Like what houses have what pieces of the pie are more packed than others, or at all. Maybe you have them all spread out all over the place and you're just here to get a well-rounded experience. Or maybe you're like me, and when you made your chart, you were like, add all to cart in like 3 areas because this is where we're going to focus in this life. So it can really vary, and they're not right or wrong. All of it is valid.
Yeah. I think about for example, when you're listening through all of the signs, when we talked through all 12 of the signs, and some of you reached out and were like, oh, like I'm so interested if I have like Virgo or Leo because I really resonated with some of the things you were talking about. And maybe you don't have, like Nicole was sharing, maybe you don't have the planets in those signs specifically. But again, Aries equals house one, and we're going to go through all of them. Taurus equals house two. So, like, if you go in order from like sign one, that the order that we went through when we went through all 12 of the signs, that's the exact order of the houses as well. And those signs, those corresponding signs, really give the flavor of each house. So, for example, I could sit here and say, I have no Libra in my chart, but I do have two very important planets in my seventh house of Libra. So there are a lot of Libra themes in my life. It's going to look different because when we're looking at the sign, it really is like the essence. It's like the how it gets expressed, right? It's like the energies that we're expressing ourselves. But when we're looking at the houses, it really is more of like the themes, right? Like Libra might be all about balance and harmony with like in very, it's an air sign and it's all about, connecting, and just like connection is important to Libra. And at the same time, when you're looking at the seventh house, it really is like, okay, now we're really looking at, when we're looking at being in balance with another person, that's our one-on-one partnerships in life, contractual partnerships, business partnerships, marital partnerships. You're really looking at your partnership, right? Like that actual kind of physical thing that you can kind of like touch in your life almost. Whereas like the essence of being in partnership with another is about balance. It's a give and a take. It's about, being in harmony and cooperating with another. So that's kind of how you can think about a little bit of the difference, because I wouldn't sit here and say like I'm a Libra, I've got Libra. But like those seventh house themes of Libra are really important to me in my life. So there's just a little bit of a difference there. But in the same way, by me understanding the Libra energy, I can also understand my seventh house a little bit better.
Absolutely. And I've had people even ask me like, hey, so I know that like physical resources are associated with the second house, and like my second house is empty. Does that mean I'm going to be poor? And I'm like, no, absolutely not.
If that was the case, I'd be poor.
If that was the case, I'd be really wealthy because I've got a lot of planets in the second house. And so it doesn't mean that at all. Like if you have empty houses, that's completely normal. Like I said, nine of my houses are almost empty. And so it's just saying that you will experience the themes of that in a different way. It's a little bit more adjacent than like the direct, oh, you have planets and signs here that you're going to work with more often. Because like we talked about with Pluto in our Pluto episode and Saturn, like all of the planets, every one of them makes their way around the 12 signs. And so at some point they're going to be aspecting or creating different angles to things and just kind of showing up in your life in the collective themes. It's really not a bad thing to have them empty. Like, thinking about rooms of a house, right? Like if you look at your whole chart, think of it as like a 12-room house. And so you're not in all 12 rooms at the same time. And, maybe like you love being in the kitchen and the office doesn't really get used. I think when things are going weird, like when I'm working and I'm like just not feeling focused, you know what I do? I like literally unplug and I move to a different area of my house. And I think it's actually a great idea because it changes the scenery. And that's kind of how astrology works, is that like sometimes you're going to be really focused on one house of your chart because there's a lot of lessons for you there. And what's really helpful is to actually go have fun in a different area of your house. Maybe learn something new, or like work on partnership, or maybe tune into your physical body. And those are different ways that you can work with the houses too. So just like a physical house we have in our home and you're using different rooms, you can go to those different places for different learnings, different teachings, and it's all part of your chart.
Yeah, I really like to think about it that in this life, these aspects of you came here to really spend time getting to know that specific room in your house. It doesn't mean that all of the other rooms in your house you're not going into them. Like, it's just like literally you might go into them, but it's like certain aspects of you really like came here to spend time learning this other thing. All of our houses are important. We have all the houses, just like we have all of the signs. The sign of your house also, like the sign of every single house in our chart, tells us about the energy, the specific flavor of that house. So for me, the second house, is in the sign of Libra. So that helps me understand my second house energy. Even though I don't have planets there, I can understand my relationship with personal resources by just looking at the sign of my second house. As we're going through all 12 of the houses, we're going to be sharing with you what it means, for a specific sign that you have connected to a house, as well as what it means if you have planets also in a specific house. So we're going to be touching on all of that. So again, just here to say that even if you don't have a planet in a house, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that area of your life is not important. It just means that certain aspects of you are really focused on spending time in other areas, whether to master them, whether to grow through them, whether to be really comfortable, for them to be your gifts in this life, for your strengths in this life. It could be all sorts of different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a tip for beginners here, when you run your chart, the links that we put in the show notes, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom when you run your own chart, it will tell you the houses for you. That'll make it really easy so you don't have to navigate the wheel and understanding all of that. So look at that. And then just, if you're a beginner, focus on the house where your sun and your moon are, because the sun is the most important part of you. Like Keelie said, this is 70% of you. You came here to fulfill this life purpose, this expression, super important. And then your moon is where you seek to be emotionally fulfilled. And so if you focus on just these two houses, they're going to give you so much information about you in those areas of life that you really came here to master and that have these gifts and shine really brightly. And then you can also focus on any houses with 3 or more planets, or 3. If you see the house number come up 3 times, you're like, oh, okay, I've got 3 different things here. Or if you're looking at the circle wheel and you notice that there's multiple symbols in one little piece of pie, that is considered a stellium, because that is a really big deal. When you have multiple planets in the same house and the same sign, it's telling a really big story. This is my life. I have this twice. So I know that those 2 areas of my life are going to be on super spotlight mode, and they're really big for me to pay attention to. Anyone kind of born between 1989, 1991, you definitely have a stellium, probably in Capricorn. So, if you're hearing this and you're like, oh my gosh, that's when I'm born, take a look at that, because that will give you an idea. In Capricorn, wherever it falls in your chart. And then, like we said before, focus on Saturn, focus on Saturn and see where you've already learned some lessons, or you're getting ready to learn some lessons. We did a whole episode on Saturn and what permission slips it's offering, what life lessons it's giving you. And it's a really important planet to play nice with, in my personal opinion, because Saturn really is here to teach us a lot. And so I love focusing on my Saturn house. For me, it's in house 2. Like I said, that second house is packed. And so really, though, anything that feels overwhelming, just push pause and come back to it another time. But for now, focus on your sun and moon. Keep it simple and focus on the houses that you actually have planets in, and you'll learn about the others in due time. And then once we do that episode on the planets, you can add this to your recipe and just make it a little bit more gourmet.
Yeah, so we're about to dive in and talk through all 12 of the houses. But before we do that, I just kind of wanted to give you guys something tangible to work with as we are talking through each one of them. So as Nicole mentioned, be sure to go run your chart. If you scroll to the very bottom of that page, you're going to see the specific house. You're going to see the sign that that house is in, and you're going to see the planets that are in that house. Go ahead right now and maybe write down, the planets, the sign, and the house. So the sign and the house that each planet is in. And a way that you can think about it, again, planet means what, the sign means the how, and the house means the where. So the what, the how, and the where. And one thing you can do is kind of form a sentence with it. And this is a way that you can start to understand yourself and synthesize these 3 parts of you and bring them together. So perhaps let's look at the sun. My sun is here to express itself by, Aquarius, and then maybe kind of bring in some adjectives for Aquarius in the area of my life related to the 6th house, which is the house of, daily routines and anything else that feel like adjectives that really align with me. As we're talking through each house, we're going to be giving you a lot of information to work with. Really pick out, just because the 6th house goes into all sorts of different things, and my sun's in the 6th house, my Mercury's in the 6th house, doesn't mean that everything is going to resonate with me. We each came here with a very different purpose, with different energy that we came here to live. And so pick out the descriptors, the adjectives of each of the houses, of each of the signs that really resonate with that part of you came here to express itself. So with that, I think we can go ahead and dive in.
Yeah, so let's start with the first house, traditional, of course. This is also known as the house of Aries. And so this is the house all about the self and identity. This is how we present ourselves in the world. This is our physical appearance, our personality traits, how we make that first impression, especially on a date. If you listen to our Sun, Moon, and Rising episode, I always like to say this house is the house of I am. This is the house of self-love, self-awareness, self-acceptance, and confidence. This is where your rising sign is. Always, always, always. It's always in the first house, and it begins the first house. So the sign of the first house describes how others see you when they first meet you. This is our physical body, our outer appearance, how we, actually show up in our mannerisms in the world, and our identity. So this is a big identity house. It describes how you take leaps in the world and how you function like that, and your physical skill sets and the work you're here to do in the world, like the physical kind of work you're here to do in the world. We'll talk a little bit more about work when we get to the sixth house, but the planets in your first house, they describe the parts of your personality that are core to your being. So any planets in the first house are super important because they're really connected to how we wear these parts on our sleeve and just the outward impression we're making in the world and what we're giving to others all the time. Even if we're not, really letting it loose, the first house is just, you can't hide it. It's very, very important. So, and we all have something in the first house. Remember, that is the rising sign. So if you're like, oh, I want stuff there, don't worry, you got it. The second house. Okay, so the second house is the traditional house of Taurus, and it represents our possessions and our values, but also a lot of people associate it with money, finances, material possessions, resources, our values, self-worth, how we earn and spend money. This, I also love to liken this house to like our connection to the earth and the elements and how we trust the universe. The sign of the second house describes how you're here to make money, how you're here to earn an income and attract more of what you value. So it really says like, how are you characterizing your innate resources, like within, like what you actually have, and the talents and strengths that you're here to use to make physical resources. It's great to understand how you define self-worth and what you value. Second house, big on values, big on possessions, big on self-worth. Now, any planets that you have in the second house will tell you the specific parts of you that play an active role in actually making the money and your attitude around money, possessions, and security. So remember that episode about Taurus? We talked about, they're the ones who are just going to likely show up with that $50 million retirement out of nowhere. And this is why, because this natural house influence is really, it's there for them. And then we have the third house. So this is the natural house of Gemini, and this is the house of communications and local environments. Now, I'll be honest with you, this one's always kind of tripped me up because I feel like the third house is so a departure from this first and the second house, and that it covers a lot of things. And so when you're listening to this, you might be like, wow, there's a lot the third house covers, and that's really interesting. So see what sticks out to you if you have third house planets. So this house rules everyday communication, short trips, siblings, and immediate surroundings. So it can also help you with learning, writing, speaking, and local transportation, play, joy, curiosity, shared ideas, and like the winds of change. Like things are always kind of just moving or happening, or you think of a busy household. That's kind of how I think of the third house. Planets in the third house describe how you're here to think and learn about your life, how you relate to your own environment, the immediate environment around you, your neighborhood, your house, things like that, and how you're here to connect and network with other people. It can describe the inner workings of your conscious mind, the way you are thinking. And the planets in this house tell you the specific parts about how you learn and communicate. Like, how are you making that connection with the world through learning and communication? So obviously this is connected to Gemini, and the third house is totally packed with a lot of interesting, fun goodies.
Okay, so the fourth house is the house of Cancer. This is another angular house. All of our angular houses, the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th houses, those are all really important houses and tell us a lot about very specific ways we came here to express ourselves in really, really important areas of our life. So the fourth house is the house of home and family. So it's very much our roots, the ancestry, family of origin. It's also our emotional foundation. Think of like the moon, our inner world, our inner foundation, emotional foundation, our inner self. It also represents our early childhood when we're growing up in the home. What kind of environment is our home? So when you're looking at the sign of your fourth house, it's really describing the past, the present, and your future home. Like, really, what is the environment that you seek out when you want to be at home and in your own safe space at home? It tells you the qualities of your home, including the kind of home and familial relationships that you had growing up, the kind of home that you will make yourself, and the kind of security that you are seeking even as you age. It's also going to inform you about anything you've brought into this life from your ancestors as well. The fourth house is so much about, even like real estate. So if you're someone who has a lot of planets in the fourth house, that could be something that you find yourself really attracted to. And again, with all of these themes, they're very much kind of just different things that we might find ourselves attracted to. If you have planets in the fourth house, then these describe the parts of you that play a really key role in securing the foundation of your life. They're really key players in your home, and like these aspects of you are really present in the home and in your family life, as well as in your emotional attachments. They're also parts of you that you may prefer to keep more protected and secluded from the inner world. Your fourth house is all about the home and your roots and like being behind closed doors and in your safe space. Okay, so the fifth house is the house of Leo. This is the house of creativity and pleasure, also self-expression, romance, children, hobbies of how we have fun and play, also entertainment. It's also love affairs and taking risks. Gambling resides here too. So the sign of the fifth house describes how you are here to express yourself creatively, how you distinguish yourself from other people, how you seek to be seen and appreciated by others. This is also the house of your inner child and can help you understand how you relate to play and joy out in the world. Now, planets that you have in the fifth house suggest individuated aspects of your personality that are so core to your creative being and how you came here to express yourself. These parts of you really act as tools and resources for this self-exploratory process that you're in. When I think about the fifth house, I have my Saturn here. And it's so interesting because so much of what I feel like I am learning, and even this past year, this whole theme of expression and just my blocks around my own ability to self-express and really step into the fullness of my expression. And I think about Saturn being here and I'm like, wow, is that just not what I have just totally seen as the lesson that I came here to learn, is this energy of Leo and how to self-express. That's what's really resonated with me from this sign. But there's also so many other meanings that as we continue to grow and evolve on this journey, like our relationship of whatever planets you have in this house specifically, that will always continue to shift and evolve. So in this chapter of my life, for example, I might really connect with like this house of expression, and that might always be the case, but maybe in another chapter of my life, I might have a new relationship with it, with like play and children and joy and like what all that means for me. So the sixth house is the house of Virgo. This is the house of work and health, also daily routines, work habits, rituals, being of service to others. The first house we talk a lot about, like that's the body, like the physical body. But the sixth house is very much like how you take care of your body, like the routines, your health routines, your wellness routines. It also is the house of pets, of just your daily chores and how we integrate work into our lives. So this is one of the other work houses. We really have like 3 work houses. I always like to think like the second house is kind of like how you make money through your work. The sixth house is kind of like your day-to-day work. And then the 10th house is kind of like your overall career. So the sign of your sixth house really describes how you are here to work, how you came here to be of service out in the world on the day-to-day. Okay, so like what are your daily job duties and responsibilities, as well as the kind of work environment that best suits you? For me, I have Aquarius on my sixth house. So how do I really seek this like Aquarian energy in my day-to-day work? So that's something you can really feel into, is like, what do I really require in like my day-to-day work environment? Your sign of the sixth house is going to help you understand the how of that. It also describes the kind of routines and rituals that are going to best support you. Now, planets in your sixth house will tell you about the parts of you that play an active role in your day to day work, in your health, in your routines. And these planets require a daily outlet for expression. So that's something really important to just note. If you have planets here, they really are asking to seek expression through what you are doing on your day to day. This is like the busybody house. I mean, and if you think about it, you think about Virgo, it's like always being busy, always wanting to be of service, always wanting to give a helpful hand. And these are kind of the themes associated with that Virgo energy.
I love it. I also see the sixth house as being like the house of the secretly really witchy person.
You and your Virgo witchy. I love it, though.
I do.
I love that definition.
Yeah, I'm like, if you're not correcting me, you're definitely also a witch. So, like, either way, I love it for you. And
Nicole's
that's just
helping me embrace all like my witchy energy.
Yeah, exactly. It was only right that Keelie covered the sixth house because her Virgo energy is just pristine. But this brings us to the seventh house. So this is the house of Libra. We talked a little bit about this, but this is another angular house. And so this is a really important one, 1, 4, 7, and 10. This house, the seventh house, represents partnerships and relationships. So this is any one-to-one relationship you have, marriage, business partnerships. They also say it's the house of open enemies, but I just don't like to think about that part because I'm like, oh gosh, as a Scorpio, I can't even imagine the list of enemies that I might have in the open. No, I'm just joking. But, this also talks about how we interact with others and the dynamics of our close relationships. And so I also see the seventh house being super important for boundaries, the angelic realm, neutral mind, free of judgment. So if you think of Libra being very neutral, like that is very associated with this house. The sign of the seventh house describes the energetic qualities that you're going to seek out in a partnership, how you relate and cooperate with others, the energy that you want to lean into when you're seeking more harmony and balance in your life. For me, I see this big time. I have Taurus on my seventh house, and so I do seek that really grounded stability that comes with these things in partnerships. Like, I'm not going to pick a partnership, a business partnership, or anything with someone who's, wild or like completely ungrounded. It's just very important to me. And I think that that's a really cool trait to notice and to see when you can figure out, oh, I don't have any planets in this house, but I do see how this plays out for me. Planets in your seventh house find their expression through projection and identification with others. So you can get it. Relationships. How are we projecting ourselves onto others? How are we being mirrored back by others? They're key players in your relationships, and they serve as guides into understanding the more unrecognized qualities within yourself. That mirror comes out again. It can really help us see things that we're not ready to see, but it helps us be better in those partnerships and in those relationships. So the eighth house. This is the house of Scorpio. This represents intimacy and transformation. So most astrologers will always say the eighth house represents sex, death, and other people's money, and they cannot separate the three because they're usually like, we don't know which one it is, like which one's going to be the most popular for you. And so if you think about those things, it's kind of like, oh, that's a pretty heavy house. But I think there's really a lot of transformation that's possible here because, representing death and rebirth here gives a lot of themes that people are uncomfortable with. But if you can really embrace your eighth house planets or your eighth house qualities, it's just going to be easier. Transformation and crisis and deep emotional bonds are also big themes of the eighth house. And, I also see it as being really big for surrender, looking into the great unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. Being okay with that, like that's major eighth house vibes. What's hidden? Like what is hidden? What's not seen? The eighth house will help us see these things. And it's also about being open to receiving other people's resources. So just like being opposite of the second house, your possessions, the eighth house is representing other people's possessions. So you can see how these start to come together. So the eighth house rules sex, birth, death, the afterlife. It rules money and possessions that belong to your partner, other people, taxes and debt, inheritance. You can find psychic powers here, occult studies, taboo knowledge, all very popular in the eighth house. This sign of the eighth house informs you about how you're here to transform and the qualities as it relates to these specific themes. So planets in the eighth house describe parts of you that are here to transform and be reborn throughout this life. It can indicate a natural sensitivity that you have to these topics and just like an innate knowing or some sort of unseen, unknown, truly on the surface grasping that you have to this knowledge. And so it's super cool. I love the eighth house. I have Jupiter in the eighth house, and the more I've learned and leaned into that, it has been really, really expansive for me. And of course, it's the natural house of Scorpio. So I think I'm pretty much at home with this eighth house. All right, this brings us to the ninth house, the house of Sagittarius, the house of higher learning and travel. So Sagittarius, when we think about that, when we think about the ninth house, we think about higher education, philosophy, religion, travel, foreign cultures. These are those pack up a suitcase and go people. When you've got like a packed ninth house, either like you are studying and you know all the cool stuff about history, or you're packing a suitcase and you're on the go, or both, and in that suitcase is like the Roman Empire books that you're studying. It's like a cool way to expand your consciousness and, really embrace long distance travel. So ninth house people, seekers of truth, seekers of spirituality, and just really in touch with the higher mind. The sign of the ninth house describes how you're here to approach some of life's greatest questions. What answers do you have inside? What answers are you seeking outwardly? It involves philosophy, politics, religion, law, and it tells you how you're here to publicly express those ideas through literary efforts, authorship, big for the ninth house, and how you approach education and travel. So, planets in your ninth house are on a quest for deeper meaning and purpose. If anything, this is the house of asking, why am I here? What am I here to do? This is a big purpose house. These parts of you encourage truth and uphold higher values and principles, and they really promote philosophical and spiritual adventures. I think of these people as the people that were revered for their knowledge, back in the day. And they still are, but I just think of those people you had to go to the wise ones, or, the people that were really running the libraries. They definitely had big ninth house or Sagittarius placements.
Okay, so the 10th house is the house of Capricorn, and this is the house of your career and public image. So just like the 4th house is like at the very bottom of your chart, your 10th house is the highest point in your entire chart. It marks the midhaven line in your chart, which we'll get into more advanced topics in a different episode, but just kind of giving you a little flavor and taste of some of the advanced terms here. But that just is here to help you understand that like your 10th house being the highest point in your entire chart, it's like how you came here to be seen. It's like putting yourself on top of the world for everyone to see that you're like, hey, I'm here, like this is me. And so this really is the house of like, your social status, your highest calling in this life. I think of it as like the house of the CEO as well. Like think like, your goals, your reputation, just like your authority, and also just the life path, the highest calling, the life path of your highest calling that you came here to live. And also ambition and overall just how you came here to make a contribution to society. So the sign of your 10th house describes how you came here to function in society, how you're here to make a contribution, and the kind of qualities that you embody when you are living out your highest calling. And then it can also help you understand a bit about the kind of career that would best suit you. And then how these parts of you express themselves vocationally, that's where you then look at the sign that planet is in the 10th house. So the 10th house is a really important house. It's all about, again, just like who you came here to be in front of the world and like how you came here to live your career and the aspects of you that are really seeking expression in your career. So if you have planets here, your career is probably an important part of your life for you. The 11th house is the house of Aquarius. It's the house of friendships, of social groups, also humanitarianism and hopes and dreams. Think common goals, group interactions, social networking, belonging, community. It's such a community house. It really is seeking to be in connection with groups of other people, and then also social causes. The sign of the 11th house describes how you're here to be innovative, unique, and create social change in the world. It also describes the energetic qualities that you bring when you're with larger groups or organizations, also including, friends and communities. And then planets in the 11th house are original aspects of your personality that seek to create long-lasting impact in the world around you. They love to be involved with the group and are always dreaming up inspiring ways to bring about meaningful change. These planets here that you have in the 11th house really are here to suggest, the unique role that you play as a team member in the group. And then the final house that we have is the 12th house. This is the house of Pisces, the house of spirituality and the subconscious. Also, being of selfless service. It's very, very selfless house. Higher ideals, also secrets. Think like hidden. I think if I were to think of any room in the house being the 12th house, it's like the attic. That's like this like really cool. It's like your own little like personal cave. Like nobody else can find you there. Like you just cozy up there with like all your favorite secret things that nobody gets to know what you're doing other than you. That's what I really think about the 12th house. So collective soul, transcendence, charity, dream world. Also, traditional institutions like hospitals, prisons, retreats, really like being in solitude. Again, it's kind of like being alone in your own space to dream up whatever it is you want to dream up. It can also be the house of karma as well. The 12th house is the most mystical of them all, as it's associated with the psychic powers and the ability for you to really discover the true meaning of life. The sign of the 12th house describes the way in which you commit yourself to a dream or ideal and work towards the realization of that dream. It also defines the limitations that you might place on yourself throughout life, including some self-undoing behavior. So planets in the 12th house tell you specific parts of you that are here to be of service to those who are in need. Again, these are planets that really seek to be compassionate out in the world and to really give in like this selfless way. They highlight the parts of you that are here to express the highest state of love and compassion, and that are really here to focus on transforming pain and suffering into true love and being of service. So these parts of you also really might like solitude and really do seek that safe space out to be in your own space, to be in your own secret worlds where you can dream whatever it is you want to dream and do whatever you want to do.
I love that take on Pisces and the 12th house. It's a beautiful one. Now, we've talked about all 12 houses. We've gone from Aries all the way through Pisces, the first, all the way through the 12th house. And we hope that you've heard some qualities of yourself or some areas of your life that you're like, yeah, wow, that is so me. And definitely tell us what you're feeling or like where you're excited to lean into more. I wanted to touch on a few advanced notes and tips. So there are a lot of housing systems in astrology. When you go and you use more advanced calculations and things like that, there will be lists and lists and lists of things that you can use. And so that all determines where different houses are calculated. If you think about back in the day, people were doing this with telescopes and little protractors and angles, and they were calculating everything by hand. And so everyone probably did it different from village to village, and that's why there's so many. Now, for reference, Keelie and I both practice using the Placidus house system. And if you have no idea what we're talking about, don't worry. Just ignore what we're saying about Placidus or any other housing systems. Use the chart that we showed you in the show notes to calculate your houses, and you'll be fine. But just know there are other ways to approach like calculating houses and doing all these things. If it ever feels aligned to you to look at a different way of calculating houses, we totally encourage you to explore doing so. There is no right and wrong here. It's just all different. And the Placidus housing system is probably one of the most widely used. So that's why Keelie and I both use it, because it makes sense to us. But don't worry if you're like, what is Nicole talking about right now? We just wanted to throw that note in there.
And now that we've really unpacked all of these pieces, several of the planets we've already talked about. Again, we're going into all of them in our next episode following this one. But we've talked about the signs, and now we've talked about the houses. So again, synthesize those pieces of you together to really start to just connect with these parts of you. And don't let it overwhelm you, because we know astrology can be such a complicated language. Nicole and I have had our fair share of like just sifting through all the information, because there can be so much. But really let this just kind of be this very light, intuitive process for you. Feel into just some of the words that we shared today as we went through each house, and really feel into one's, which one feels most resonant for you, which one maybe felt a bit uncomfortable for you, and just kind of take a look at what your relationship is with each of these houses. Another thing that you can just think about on the most surface of levels, when we talk about now, eclipses are happening in Pisces and Virgo this next year. Look at the house that Pisces and Virgo occupies in your chart, and that can give you some more flavor as to where in your life you might be experiencing some of these really big growth lessons. For me, just knowing that I have Pisces and Virgo, my first and seventh house, that tells me a lot about where I'm going to be impacted by the eclipses, knowing where Aries and Libra was for this whole last eclipse cycle. Again, we talked about all of this in our 2025 astrology, so be sure to listen to that and then you'll know what I'm talking about here. But now you've got some more information to play with to deepen into this understanding of how some of these transits or just major astrological shifts are going to be affecting you going forward.
Absolutely. And if you think about adding in the transits and the eclipses to this whole equation, this is like right now adding like truffles to your meal. It's like it's extravagant but totally doable. So
I'm loving like all the food and now I'm kind of hungry. So
I was like, how can I make this about like a recipe? I'm like, yeah, this is like fancy. This is like adding a little bit more to it.
The truffles.
But it's super important to know where eclipses are hitting in your chart, especially from a house. Like we said earlier, those angular houses, the 1, 4, 7, 10, those eclipses will always just impact your life whether or not you have planets there or not. And so, we'll of course do a full forecast and eclipse season once that rolls around in March and give you everything you need to know. But this is a great way to start kind of getting ahead with this information and having fun with it and knowing like, wow, look at those houses I have and like all the cool things of the areas of my life that it represents. So we hope you enjoyed learning about houses today. Remember, keep it slow, take this information little bits at a time, and we'll be back again next week with an episode on all of the planets so you can even deepen your knowledge further. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love if you'd share it with another astrology bestie or one of your close friends. And as always, you can keep up with us on Instagram and TikTok at Those Astrology Girls. If you share, rate, or review our podcast, we'd be eternally grateful. It helps us get the word out there. And we hope to see you again next week. Talk soon.
Bye.